And now we turn to our weekly series, Flashpoints, with CBS News national security analyst Juan Zarate, spanning the globe in search of stories that you ought to know about. So Juan, let's start with the new round of UN sanctions against Iran imposed this past week. Sounds like more of the same. This is the fourth round. Not much has changed. Will this change anything?
Well, I think this is a bit of a hollow victory, Bill. I think in some ways it's important because it reinforces the prior sanctions, adds some new dimensions, focusing on the Revolutionary Guard Corps, adds some names to the list of those companies and individuals whose assets should be frozen, focusing as well on inspections. But at the end of the day, this is really, I think, a failed set of sanctions in the sense of the context in which this happened. First, the U.S. lost unanimity at the UN. In the prior, actually, four sanctions, moving from 2006 to 2008, you had unanimity at the UN. Here you had Turkey and Brazil breaking away and voting against. You had Lebanon abstaining. So in the sense of creating a symbolic isolation of Iran, we really failed in that regard. Secondly, the sanctions don't bite. There's nothing in there about energy, which is the Achilles heel of the Iranian regime, imports of refined gasoline, nothing there. And there are caveats built in throughout the sanctions to accommodate the Chinese and Russians. And so we may have given up quite a bit to have what are fairly meek sanctions and in a context in which Iran is less and less isolated.
The administration presents this, in their words, as a 1-2-3 punch. First the UN, followed by the European Union later this month, and then by unilateral U.S. sanctions, which in one bill that's circulating right now could mean penalties for anybody who supplies refined gas to the Iranians.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm a big fan, and when I worked at the Treasury, helped to shape some of the targeted financial sanctions and pressure that can be applied, and no doubt things can be effectively done. And I think one of the things that's on the positive side of the ledger here is you've seen a lot of private companies, petroleum companies, insurance companies, banks withdrawing from investments, withdrawing from activities with Iran. But at the end of the day, the ultimate question here is, have we put too many eggs in this basket of sanctions? That is to say, are we relying too heavily on a set of sanctions that may hurt the Iranian regime, but may not ultimately stop them in their drive for a nuclear program, which is really the sine qua non, the question as to whether or not these things are going to work and whether or not they're going to be effective.
Okay, but if sanctions aren't working, and they don't seem to be all that much, what other options are there short of bullets?
Well, there's a range of things we can look at. Obviously, tightening the financial sanctions, working toward actual implementation of the ones that exist. I think implementation is often left aside once we get these grand resolutions. The question is, are people going and countries going to implement them? So I think that's key. But I think things like we're on the eve of the first anniversary of the June 12th stolen election in Iran, where the birth of the opposition dissident movement, the Green Movement in Iran, happened. What we had yesterday was Mousavi, one of the opposition leaders, calling off the demonstrations which were planned for tomorrow, June 12th, because he was afraid of the crackdown that was going to happen and wasn't quite sure that it would be seen as effective. You know, one of the things the international community could do is not just worry about sanctions and sort of put all our eggs in that basket, but think about other ways of leveraging and pressuring Iran. And part of that is from the inside. And, you know, for example, there hasn't been a major humanitarian human rights campaign to support the demonstrators. Many of these put in prison, some executed since the demonstration started. You know, where's the focus on that? I think we've lost a little bit of the sense of all of the tools that can be applied to pressure Tehran while we focus so much on what's happening in New York.
Let's turn now to Afghanistan, where General McChrystal has been forced to admit that things aren't going as well as he hoped in Kandahar. Afghanistan has kind of fallen off the radar, and yet there's a timetable looming.
Yeah.
The administration wants to begin withdrawing troops in about a year, July of 2011.
That's right. Bill, I think there's been an obvious change in tactics, in tone, and also now in timing with respect to how we're thinking about Afghanistan, and in particular Kandahar. Recall that Kandahar, for the military, for General McChrystal, has been the seminal place to shift momentum against the Taliban. The Taliban doesn't control Kandahar officially, but that's their spiritual homeland. It's where they have allegiances. It's where certain insurgent leaders are there. And what was originally billed as a military offensive, akin to what was done in Marja, is now shifting to a more civilian-oriented campaign. And so you've seen this in the tone and the lexicon used. We're talking now about a civilian surge, about partnership. Part of the reason General McChrystal has pulled back on the timetable here is he has not seen the kind of support from within the Kandahar community to support the holding and building of the counterinsurgency doctrine. And he also hasn't seen the type of support from the Afghan authorities and government in Marja or in Kandahar to give him confidence that we're going to be able to successfully do this quickly. And so this is a shift in the timetable.
But is there any reason to believe that more time equals greater success?
It's not clear, and this is, I think, something that probably General McChrystal is going back to the drawing board on, checking his assumptions about what we're doing in Kandahar. Are we actually able to sway the population to come to our side? With the Taliban engaging in horrific attacks, we saw this attack on a wedding outside of Kandahar, killing 40 plus individuals, you know, targeting individuals who are cooperating with the government, slowly attacking again in Marja. And so I think General McChrystal is going back and looking at his assumptions as to whether or not we can actually do this effectively. The other element here in the timetable is, in a sense, we've injected an artificial timetable with President Obama saying that by July 2011, we're going to start the pullout of U.S. troops, with a review starting this December by Secretary Gates as to whether or not we're being effective. That creates a political timetable, and a timetable that actually may affect dynamics on the ground with respect to how folks in Kandahar, folks in Pakistan, and other actors are viewing our level of commitment. And so this issue of timing becomes critical in terms of how we can shift the momentum on the ground.
I mean, when you strip away all the rhetoric, it seems as though things are not really working. I mean, would you go that far?
Well, I think we're having some struggles, and I think you know, the generals on the ground would say anytime you've got a strategy that hits reality, it's going to have to adjust. You're going to have to adjust to what the enemy has to say. The enemy has a vote in this. And what we've seen in Marja, for example, which was seen initially as a success, is the Taliban adjusting. They're starting to fight back. They're coming back in from the hinterlands. They're starting to try intimidating the local populace. And you've seen less cooperation, I think, from the elders and key folks in Kandahar than I think General McChrystal and perhaps even President Karzai expected.
Okay, you talk about the Taliban adjusting. That's they're also spreading their presence in other places like Somalia and Yemen. And they've got some unusual actors. Talk about that.
Well, what we see in Somalia is the continued battle for Mogadishu and the battle for control in Somalia. In Somalia, recall that you've got the Al-Shabaab movement, which is a local militia that is ideologically and in some ways logistically aligned with Al-Qaeda. They have controlled much of the south of Somalia, parts of central Somalia, and parts of Mogadishu. What's interesting, though, the dynamics on the ground are starting to shift in two ways. One, the transitional federal government, the putative government of Somalia, is starting to fight back. And they're getting quite a bit of help now from Islamic militants from a Sufi clan. This is another branch of Islam. Who have now felt assaulted by the Al-Shabaab militia. Their shrines have been attacked, their cemeteries have been unearthed, and they feel now that they have to take up arms, and they have, and they're actually coming up with some great success. They've taken back territory from the Al-Shabaab movement. The other thing that's interesting is you're getting a diversity of foreign recruits into the Al-Shabaab movement. It's largely been a local Somali-based clan militia with ties to Al-Qaeda. But what you see now is more injection of foreigners into that group. That's dangerous in many ways because you have Westerners who are potentially trained. We had the two gentlemen from New Jersey who were arrested just this past weekend who were headed to Somalia to join with Al-Shabaab. But it's also a potential opportunity for the transitional federal government because it creates a sense that this group is a group of foreigners and in a Somali environment that doesn't like foreigners very much, it actually can work to their advantage.
What about Yemen?
Yemen has, again, fallen off the radar screen a bit. It was front and center when we talked about Abdul Muttalib and the failed Detroit airliner attack on December 25th. But it continues to be in the counterterrorism crosshairs.
You've got this American-born Muslim cleric in Yemen who is a lodestar for some of these would-be al-Qaeda martyrs.
Absolutely right. Anwar al-Awlaki, who is Yemeni-American, is in Yemen, continues to come out with videos. He came out with one recently a couple of weeks ago, which was exhorting American Muslims to fight their government, calling on others to kill American citizens. He's really seen as a firebrand and the siren song for Western recruits into Yemen. And American officials have started talking more and more about the danger of him. You see, for example, a case out of Texas just recently, a week and a half ago, an individual American indicted for providing material support to al-Qaeda in Yemen, and he had direct ties to Awlaki, was getting advice from Awlaki, and so authorities are worried about him. The Yemenis have rolled up a number of foreigners, though. They're getting more and more worried about the foreigners in their midst, and I think 12 Americans or so, the numbers aren't clear yet, but 12 Americans or so have been wrapped up, and so we're going to have to see where this goes, but we need to keep a focus on Yemen because it's right in the heart of the storm here.
Yeah, but is the disturbing thing that there are American citizens going over there to train?
Absolutely. I think the disturbing trend here is that you not only have Americans headed to Yemen, but also to Somalia and to the Afghan PAC region. And I think we're going to continue to see cases, unfortunately, emerge of Americans doing precisely that.
So, Juan, no reason to be complacent about what's going on in the Middle East.
Absolutely not. I think, as I like to say often, we're dealing with three-dimensional chess here in terms of the dynamics in the Middle East, not only the terrorist threat, but the threat from Iran and other actors who certainly don't have U.S. interests at heart.
Juan Zarate, thank you very much as always.
Thank you, Bill.
Pleasure.